Hello, welcome back everyone to our Binational Conference on the Intersection of Climate Change and Water, Agriculture and Economics. As we move towards the conclusion of our today event, it is a pleasure for me to moderate and present this expert roundtable number 4 on the nexus of water, energy, and food. We have 5 fantastic speakers. I am going to begin by presenting Dr. Lydia Bambakeridou-Leroudia from the University of Exeter. Just a brief reminder, every panelist will have 10 minutes to present, and after that we will have a short Q&A with our audience. Please leave your questions in the chat box below, or if you are following us on social media, the comment box on both IMTA's and the Mexican Embassy's Facebook Live channels. So Dr. Lydia Bambakeridou-Leroudia has an engineering background with expertise and research interest focused mainly on computational modeling and hydroinformatics. Over the course of many years, she has also developed an extensive track record and expertise in international and EU-funded grants and projects, organizing and winning bids, managing, advising, guiding, and supervising teams of researchers, and evaluating proposals and projects, as well as being involved as a stakeholder in EC consultation groups. Since 2013, she has been in the leading group of the ICT for Water cluster, coordinating all its action groups. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Dr. Bambakeridou-Leroudia, and without further ado, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to say that I have a double affiliation. I am now, because I have been in Exeter for many years, but since 2 years ago, I'm in KWR, the Water Cycle Research Institute in the Netherlands, one of the most prominent ones for water. And I have also a part-time affiliation with Exeter, but currently I'm living in the Netherlands, most of the time at least. So here I'm in KWR, I'm the director of Watershare, which is an international knowledge exchange and collaboration network. And what I'm presenting today has to do with projects that are running at the University of Exeter and also together with KWR, although there are also other projects. But I'm going to present a series of projects that have to do with the Nexus and similar initiatives. First, let me start with some definitions, because I understand that there's a lot of confusion around. Nexus, when we're referring to the Nexus, we are referring to the water, energy, food ecosystem Nexus, or the 3 of them, water, energy, food, WEF Nexus, depends. Which means that we aim to take into account interlinkages and interactions among the above sectors in modeling, policies, and actions. And circular economy, which is the other theme I'm going to talk about, is a subset of the WEF Nexus. I'm going to present 2 projects that have to do with the Nexus. When we're talking about circular economy, we're talking about designing waste and pollution management with new value chains by keeping products and materials in reuse and regenerating natural systems. One of such projects is NextGen, which I'm going to present. And further subset of circular economy is industrial symbiosis, which aims in bringing together companies from different industrial sectors in order to improve their resource efficiency and sustainability by sharing and reusing resources. And a further a subset of industrial symbiosis is water-smart industrial symbiosis, which aims to create economic value and increase sustainability by introducing circular symbiotic arrangements between the industry and, this time, water service providers, even to communities. And this is about the project Ultimate, which I'm going to talk about. So, the first project I'm going to present, I'm starting with a generic circular economy for water services project called NextGen. It's towards the end now. It started about 3.5 years ago. And well, in this one, we are recycling water, energy, and materials in 10 diverse case studies. It's a big project, an H2020 European project, involving stakeholders and end users. That's standard. You cannot work on the Nexus without involving any aspect of it, stakeholders and end users, because they need to have their consent and their opinions on it. Demonstrating certain technologies and integrated framework for the assessment of circular economy, engaging the citizens with additional attractive things like serious gaming and augmented reality, recommending governance innovation. We have already produced a white paper, and introducing business models in the digital marketplace. What Exeter is doing, the special thing we're doing apart from other things, is that we are developing, and we have developed, it's finished, it's online, a serious game for examining options of water, energy, materials recycled in a toy town as a paradigm by two of my colleagues, Dr. Kuri Mehdi and Barry Evans. And this is a tool for engaging citizens and stakeholders, helping to explain the principles of circular economy. We are developing now for real case studies for Athens and Costa Brava in Spain, adapting this game to real data. And but this game is now very much in demand from various organizations. We are displaying it around the world. The most recent is by Aquatech, which is the trade exhibition in the Netherlands, international one. And you can find it. You can find all the information online. I have here the link. So in Ultimate, which is another circular economy project that goes a little deeper than NextGen, we're concentrating on what we say, which is innovation also, water smart industrial symbiosis. In this, we apply technologies for water reclamation and reuse, exploitation of energy and heat, nutrients and material recovery and reuse, and we assess the impact with life cycle and risk-based tools, and also develop high visualization tools like serious gaming at the University of Exeter. You can see the scheme of the circular schemes that are part of the Nexus in the context of Ultimate project. This started about a year ago, and it has some very prominent case studies. Among them, the oldest and best industrial symbiosis plant, I would say, place in Europe, Kalundborg in Denmark, which is the first one ever created. And it's like a lighthouse for all the rest. It can show how industrial symbiosis can indeed improve sustainability and resource efficiency. And the main principle is that the residue of one company becomes a resource in another company in the same area. Another case in which both Exeter and KW are working on this has to do with New Princess Land in the Netherlands, where we have a sugar factory producing, treating their waste, sending them to distribution systems, irrigating greenhouses, and also sending them for aquifer storage and recovery. That's another paradigm of circular economy, of where the industry improves the aquifer and also other industrial users. We are developing a serious game for it, so it's the beginning of the project. We haven't finished. We are in the modeling phase right now. And going now to different theme, a previous project, a major one, which was, I would say, the forerunner of those projects in terms of the way we're working, was Symphony Nexus, which has finished about a year ago, a novel approach towards improving decision-making for resource efficiency based on the water, land, food, energy, climate nexus. In this, what we did was that we used a variety of data, a variety of thematic models, which is models that have been developed with, for instance, for energy or agriculture or water, but not combining all the components of the nexus, covering the gaps with high-level modeling through system dynamics, and then making the program, the module in system dynamics, making a knowledge elicitation engine for a serious game for policy making and examining alternative policies. We had 12 case studies in various places in Europe. And this is the serious game, now finished, is being placed, it's being used for education for stakeholders. And you can find it online. You can play it if you wish. There is, if you go from the Symphony Nexus website, you can find it from there. And you can also have a good approach. You can find also video links on this. This is the link in the video, and you can use it to access, to find more information. Finally, recently, about a month ago, a month and a half, we have a new initiative starting, EU-funded, which is NexusNet. This is a cost action. A cost action is for networking, for building synergies. It's a cost action for the Nexus, again, the water-energy-food Nexus for a low-carbon economy in Europe and beyond. You can find all the information. And we have 48 institutions from 24 countries, 2 institutions from the UK, the University of Exeter and Cranfield. We are the management team, and we have also additional associated partners from other countries like India, Japan, and China. That might be something that might be directly relevant, because if you go online and find the coordinator, which is from the University of Thessaly in Greece, then you can also ask to be associated members through your national contact point that exists. So what we're doing there is international network of researchers working on the Nexus to deliver examples of Nexus-compliant decision-making with an overview of good Nexus practices in Europe, but also beyond. Policy coherence, Nexus-compliant practices, and so on, in transdisciplinary context, translating academic research into practical and applicable knowledge for the private sector and policymakers. And also we are planning a series of intense knowledge transfer and dissemination actions. And I think my 10 minutes are almost over, or if not, we can ask me some questions. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vanderquerido, for your fantastic presentation. Next, I'm going to introduce Susan Berner. Dr. Susan Berner is a postdoctoral Marie Curie Global Fellow in the School of Geography, Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Birmingham and in the School of Public Health at the Universidade do São Paulo. She uses participatory action research to explore young people's local knowledge and everyday practices related to the food, water, energy nexus, climate change, and disaster risk reduction in Brazil. With an interest in applied and impact-oriented research, she aims to identify pathways for integrating good knowledge into public policies for a sustainable and healthy urban development. Thank you, Susan, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Just came back from the field, actually, so I can bring you some first-hand experiences from this week. I'm actually based in Brazil at the moment, although I'm also partially based in Birmingham in the UK, where I'm going to be back in January. And let me just share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Hopefully that works. So, yes, I would like to... It's visible. Great. I would like to talk a bit about young people and the food, water, energy nexus. It's a topic that has been explored also by colleagues in Birmingham that have a big focus on young people, as well as colleagues here in Brazil. Like Rodrigo kindly said, I'm based in Birmingham and in São Paulo. And in my project, I'm trying to mix the focus on the food, water, energy nexus and disaster risk reduction with participatory methods, because especially in the area where I'm working, as I'm going to explain in a bit, it's an area very much affected by resource insecurity, but also by disaster risk. But what I want to look at is at the one hand, use everyday experiences with the nexus, as well as their adaptive practices to resource insecurity and disaster risk, because we think that young people actually have a lot of knowledge to share from the everyday experiences, and they already have adaptive practices, although sometimes being quite informal and less visible. And I think, when we talk about climate change and disaster risk reduction, the Nexus, often we think about Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future, as well as like movements even from the periphery in Brazil or other countries. But I was always thinking, what about those young people, who are being affected on an everyday basis by resource insecurity, by disaster risk, and whose voices are not being heard? And why is it? So for those who are interested, there's actually an article I wrote last year together with Peter Crafto and Leandro Giacchi, which is actually about what we call blurring the ism and climate activism, to kind of broaden the approach. Because in my research, actually, the focus is very much on those young people that are hard to reach in the periphery of São Paulo and Brazil. And I assume that there's also a lot of similarities with the context as well in Mexico. For those who are not very familiar with the Brazilian context, the area where I'm studying, it's about an hour north of São Paulo. You can go by train. It takes like about an hour and a half, more or less. And it's an area, like I said, it's very much affected by flooding, especially in the rainy season, as well as landslides, with a lot of precarious housing settlements, some informal, some being formalized, but also a lot with no access to energy, at least not in a regular, access way. And so there's a kind of many problems, manifold problems also in times of, the drought season, where there's water scarcity, and a lot of families, especially after COVID, are very much dependent on food aid. And the young people that I work with, I kind of work through different social centers that are actually also in charge of distributing food aid in the area. And what I've been finding in terms of conditions, just to give you a brief idea, is that there's a lot of precarity which has been exacerbated during COVID, with a lot of unemployment or informal employment. And also for the young people, the ones I work with, they're like 12 to 18, but for many of them, like the main issue is actually finding employment. And there's not very much, the focus on environmental issues in the everyday, dialogues that they have with their friends or their families. But like with the project, we try to kind of have a bit more an approach for them to kind of look at the environment in a different way and identify not only the scarcities, but also possible interventions or possible adaptations as well that go beyond what they're already doing in terms of adapting to energy insecurity and energy poverty and water scarcity. So I worked with two social centers, actually, one based more in the center of the city, which is in the lower part, close to the river, where we have like more flooding problems. The other one being based more like in the higher areas, in the hills, where we have like more landslides issues, but we also have flooding problems in the upper areas because of the very steep slopes. So like the water kind of goes down very quickly, and often like not all streets also have pavement, which also causes extra problems. Actually, what the main idea was, as I said in the beginning of the fellowship, it was to have a participatory project with face-to-face activities. But I started my fellowship in October 2019, and COVID obviously happened in March 2020, when I had just been going to the field for about a month. Then the project stopped for a while, and we were thinking what to do and how could we, explore young people's knowledge also from a distance with the displacement of the researcher from the field. Because we also didn't want, to stop working with young people, especially those in conditions of hardship and being harder to reach, because we felt especially those young people's everyday knowledges and interactions with their environments were really much important to better understand sources of unsustainability, and also to create, for them, maybe new panoramas of action through this everyday learning processes. But then, obviously, before COVID, being able to go to the field, it was much more easier to have participatory approaches. For example, we use participatory mapping, as you can see in the left picture, where we ask them people to kind of draw, the territory where they live in, and to kind of map different environmental issues that they are perceiving. And we also had guided tours by the young people to kind of help them reconnect and dialogue in a different way with the local environment, because often we don't really see, the place where we live. We don't have this view of the problems, right? Like when we go maybe to work every day, we don't look right or left, and we don't think about problems and also solutions and maybe space we could use differently. But like I said, with COVID, it became very tricky to kind of keep going, and we had to stop for a while. But then we found a kind of creative solution to use WhatsApp, which is very much accessible also to hard to reach social groups in Brazil, because many phone providers actually provide unlimited access to WhatsApp. So what we did through the social centers, we created different WhatsApp groups to continue the project online, and we offered an extension course through the University of São Paulo for the young people to receive a certificate at the end. So we conducted this course for about like 5 or 6 months, starting last year in November and finishing this year in June, more or less. But now I've been back to Brazil for a month, and we've been trying to kind of restart activities also face-to-face, because there's also, a limitation to what is possible to be done online in terms of also participatory methods. But just to give you a short idea of what we did, so we did like some short interviews and group discussions online with weekly activities, and we asked young people to send like short video clips like this one, for example, in the group. And we also had like some practical projects about like recycling plastic bottles and thinking about what could be possible to do, with recycled material. And we used a lot of photo voice, like photographic activities. But it's obviously a different thing when you're asking people to do things on their own and you don't have the group dynamics. So, but even then, I think it was quite interesting also to have the discussions online, and let's talk about talking about energy insecurity, for example. There were some interesting things that came up, and I think which is like the essence of participatory research that we as researchers sometimes don't really maybe consider in the beginning. Like in my initial approach, I was thinking more about landslides and flooding, but what came up a lot were also like the topic of lightning strikes and power cuts, for example. The quotes on the slide are some examples from the discussions we had with the girls, also in terms of what they do, when a storm comes, and how do they know that maybe they have to unplug the electric devices at home, and also like showing that they actually do have knowledge about adapting to disaster, to avoid also, for example, that the television, for example, is reached by the water, because many houses also have the problems of flooding. And the girls are quite aware of the risks that they live with, on an everyday basis. And they do have, their own adaptation mechanisms in terms of, for example, many people don't live, in the basement, but they live like on the first floor, and they don't have important stuff in the lower parts of the house. So when, they know the flooding might be coming, it's easier to move important stuff to the first floor, so they don't have a loss, for example, of fridge or important items like beds or televisions. These are just some pictures from this week, actually, going back to the field. Just to give you a bit of an illustration, we had also a youth-led walk to think about different adaptations, also of urban space. In the right picture, it's the school, at the local school, like with an area which has been abandoned, which is not being used, where we talked about like the different uses of space we could give, also in terms of leisure. So we are trying to kind of integrate different topics, because I think, what the girls also brought in the topic is that the environment, it's not something they would prioritize in their everyday lives, but it doesn't mean that they don't have any knowledge. So when we think about Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future, I think often we really neglect that young people do have a lot of knowledge, as was presented by them, in terms of, access to food. And there was a lot of discussion, obviously, about prices and prices going up for everything, and the accessibility in terms of also mobility of local stores not providing everything. And the young people having to go to the center of the city maybe once a month with their families to do the shopping, but also like issues related to price for fuel. So it's very much connected. And I think this everyday reflection for them to think about, where do we actually access food, or how could we think about maybe local production of food in our backyards, which is already happening, where many families, for example, have fruit trees in their gardens. So just having this discussion, I think, just to wrap up here, where are we heading? What would we need? I think often we just talk about problems, but I think this discussion about solutions, sometimes it's very challenging, especially in the periphery, where young people don't feel very much listened to, especially by adults. And they feel that there's a big complexity of issues, which makes it hard for them to actually find solutions, but maybe start, from a smaller scale, or maybe not very big ones, like I think having this dialogue with them and also looking, at examples from different countries, and I think this is why it's so important to have an exchange for intercultural learning. And I think this initiative today is great for that as well, like how we can learn from other people's experiences with the Nexus in different countries. And in my project, it's been quite an interesting approach, because also for them to learn, from what's going on in Europe, for example. And we brought in some examples of how things are being done, for example, in the UK, discussing food production as well. I think this kind of opportunities for young people to learn and also being taken seriously and to engage in dialogue, I think is something we should kind of think more about for future projects as well. Just a list of publications I'm happy to share with anybody who is interested. And thanks so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Susan. We would like to discuss further your presentation afterwards. And yes, please, if you can share with us the list of publications, I'm pretty sure that everyone here will be very interested in looking through it. Next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Carol Dallin. She is an associate professor in sustainable food systems in the Institute of Sustainable Resources at University College London. She joined UCL in 2016 as a Natural and Environmental Research Council Independent Research Fellow with a proleptic academic appointment. Her fellowship research focused on the environmental sustainability of global food and production and trade. From 2014 to 2016, she was a research officer at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics. There she worked on the Southern Africa's hydroeconomy and water security project with Declan Conway, concentrating on the water, food, energy nexus of Southern Africa and on the socioeconomic implications of climate forecast regarding natural resources management in particular. She obtained her PhD in environmental engineering and water resources with Ignacio Rodriguez Iturbe and her certificate in science, technology, and environmental policy with Denise Mosagal, both at Princeton University. Her doctoral thesis focused on water resources transfers through Chinese and international agricultural trade. Finally, she obtained a diploma d'ingénieur from l'École Centrale Paris in 2011 with majors in physics, chemistry, and environmental science. Quite an impressive resume. Thank you very much for being here, Carol, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm going to start sharing my presentation. Just let me know in case you don't see it. It should be full screen now.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Thanks a lot. Let me just try to move my video. Something strange. Anyway, okay. So good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Carol Dallin. So I'm now associate professor in sustainable food systems at the University College London in the UK. So thanks a lot for inviting me to this roundtable. So in this talk, I will focus on the water and food interactions of the water-energy-food nexus, and also on the risk posed to this nexus by climate change. So, as we know, agriculture is really at the heart of this water-energy-food nexus. So, nexus means connections, and for agriculture, it starts with physical connections. So, it's obviously a large user of land. It's the largest human use of land is for pasture and cropland, as you can see on this map. And it's also, agriculture is also the largest water consumer. So it affects the water cycle. It's by far using the most water compared to other sectors. And another interesting and important link is the international food trade. So, about 10 to 20% of the food that is produced globally is for exports rather than consumption within the same country. So that means we have an extra type of connection that is not necessarily as physical as is, the land use, but it's really important to be able to improve sustainability or overall outcomes of agriculture, because the drivers of this production can be demand that is really far away and in different parts of the world. So agriculture is also a very important sector for climate mitigation and adaptation. So it's very exposed to the variation of climate, in particular because of the changes in water availability. So we've talked about floods and droughts, but it's also an important source of greenhouse gas emission that then lead to climate change. So it's a really important source of greenhouse gas, especially from rice and from ruminant meat and dairy production. So just to go over a bit this nexus connection. So as you see on the graph, you have water resources, so from rainfall or from irrigation from rivers, lakes, or underground aquifers that we heard today, are required to make agri-food products, but also the agricultural activities affect the water cycle. So when you extract water, the availability downstream can reduce. The local vegetation change can also affect the climate. If the area used to be a forest and it's becoming cropland, then the local climate is also affected. And another connection is that obviously climate change affects the availability of water resources and affects yield also through heat stress, for example. So there's a lot of connection, and in this talk, I'm going to focus really on the water and food, and especially the sustainability of water use for food production. So why? Because agriculture, as I said, is a dominant driver of water use, and in particular groundwater abstraction, which leads to aquifer depletion, as you can see on this picture on the right. And this increasing overuse of water resource is expected to increase because there is more demand for food, and there is also more uncertainty in the available supply of water. So that, of course, poses some threats to food security, to ecosystems, and the environment, as was mentioned in previous talks today. So in our research, we try to tackle this need to assess the sustainability of water use, to track progress towards the Sustainable Development Goal, in particular the one on water sustainability. And what we aim to do is to advance the existing research by looking separately at different water sources. So rainfall, which then gets stored in the soil as soil moisture, surface water, and groundwater. So three main sources of water. And we wanted to go beyond what has been done previously, which is looking at water use efficiency or the water footprint, which is saying, where should I source my, my avocado to be more sustainable? Should I go to Brazil, or should I go to Mexico, or to, India? So this is a difficult question to answer, of course. But the first, people started by looking at water footprint, saying this is the liters of water consumed, and this is the tons of avocado grown with this water. So that's what we call the water footprint. But we wanted to go beyond and by saying that it's not because you use 1 liter of water here and 2 liters there that is better to go in the 1 liter, because this 1 liter might be in a very dry area where this water is more precious than in a more humid area. So that's the idea behind this indicator, which is the water depth. So we look at the use of water by crop, by crops in a location, and we compare it to the local renewable availability of water. So you don't have to necessarily look into the details on the equation, but if you're interested, I put the references of this paper. And roughly the idea is to compare the water consumption to the availability for those three types of water resources. So rainfall, surface water, and groundwater. So this water depth indicator is quite easy to understand because if it's expressed in years, because when it's comparing how much water is the crop consuming in a year, so when you produce your annual crop production, you use a certain amount of water, and then how many years the hydrological cycle will take to replenish this. So if it's less than 1 year, it's sustainable because you take what gets renewed. But when this water depth, so WT, is more than 1 year, you are unsustainably using water resources. And this is what it looks like. So this is the crop water depth indicator for surface water. And we have shown in red the different areas with particular crops that are involved. So that when it's red, again, orange to red is more than 1 year. That means that we depend on upstream resources. So the local runoff, the local surface water availability isn't enough to sustain the current crop production. And even more interesting is when we look at groundwater. So this is the map of the crop water depth for groundwater. And again, we circled the area where it's unsustainable. And we see, for example, the Central Valley of California. We see the Midwestern US and Texas rice production as well, which relies on groundwater that doesn't get renewed as quickly as it gets extracted. So we often find values more than 5 years, even 20, hundreds of years. You cannot see much Mexico, but there are a few red cells there as well. Of course, this depends a lot on the data quality that we have in different regions. We just try to use the most up-to-date and the most advanced data set with a global coverage. So that's our constraints. We're trying to do this over the world. And I just want to talk quickly about two other studies. So just a few slides, 2-3 slides. So this one is in another study. We focused on this water depth indicator in one country, which is South Africa. And we added projections under 3 climate change scenarios. So you can see the 3 colors correspond to the different scenarios. So RCP 2.6 to 8.5. So the N.5 is the most warming. And as we can expect, when there is more warming, we see that our water depth index increases over time. And that's linked in part to the crop water demand, as you can see on the right-hand side. So I'm showing grapes and wheat in this example. We find that the water demand increase for wheat and grapes. And so the production is becoming even less sustainable than today because the water depths were already a bit higher than 1 year and they reach up to 4 or 5 years in the future in these projections. And this is showing the same results for all crops that all the crops we considered as a map. So this is map of South Africa. Each line is a climate change scenario, and each column is a year that we projected our indicators. And just zooming in as an example in 2050, and we can see a lot of red. So that means the water stress is predicted to increase in the future. And that's both because water requirement of the crop will increase and because the availability of water resources is decreasing in certain areas of the country. And finally, we also look at the links between producers and consumers. As I was mentioning in the beginning, trade is really important for food system. And so here we see the countries that are trading food, but we only show the food that is grown from overexploited groundwater. So the irrigation comes from those depleting reserves of water. So it means that the crops are at risk because it's not sustainable forever, this production. So I've circled Mexico as an example, which, as you can see, the green band is an export from the green country, which is Mexico in that case. And you see the US is in purple. So all the purple links are exports from the US. So you see that it's interesting. Mexico and US are exchanging those products grown with unsustainable groundwater. And it's maize, but it's just maize in different forms and different commodities. And yeah, so to conclude, we see that many regions experience water stress because of crop production, and this risk is shared with other countries. It's globalized because of trade. Of course, that might be also a way to mitigate risk, to have several partners rather than just rely on your own production. But I also wanted to mention that in our team, we are working on environmental sustainability of food more generally. So looking at the impacts on climate change, on water quality, on biodiversity, very important as well. And we find that there are sometimes win-wins, so synergies, but sometimes trade-off among these different priorities. So we have to keep in mind that there are several things we need to work towards, and sometimes we have to manage trade-offs across those things. So thanks for your attention, and that's my contact and my website if you want any more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dallin. And thank you for sticking to the time limit. Moving forward, we are going to take a slight change of perspective. We're getting extra terrestrial. We are happy to have our next speaker, Bruno Aragon, who works at the Jet Propulsion Lab at NASA. Dr. Bruno Aragon is an environmental engineer with a focus on estimated evapotranspiration at high spatiotemporal resolutions. Bruno joined JPL as NASA postdoctoral program fellow working with Dr. Joshua Fisher. His research aims to better understand the response of ecosystems to water availability at high spatiotemporal resolutions and establish a link between evapotranspiration, ecology, and biology, as well as to identify ecosystem vulnerabilities and responses to a changing environment. He holds a PhD on environmental science and engineering from the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and a master's degree in energy management and renewable resources from Instituto Tecnológico de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey, and another master's degree on environmental science and engineering from King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. He has a bachelor's degree in mechatronics engineering and engineering from Instituto Tecnológico de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey. Bruno, thank you for being with us and for accepting our invitation. And please, mic is yours.
Hey, Rodrigo, thank you very much for the nice introduction. Just one small point. As of last Friday, I'm changing affiliations. So I'm leaving in JPL. I left JPL. So without further ado, because of the time, I want to start the presentation. I want to discuss the role of remote sensing in the water food energy nexus. I actually have to thank the previous presenter because she already went over a few of the slides that I wanted to show. But still, as a recap, the population is expected to grow by 2 billion by the year 2050. And with more people, we are expecting to produce more food to feed everyone. This is a problem because there is an uneven resource distribution in the Earth. You may expect that to see the Earth as a very water-rich area in our universe, but the reality is that we can concentrate all of this water in these bubbles that we see in the right side of the image. The big blue one is all of the world's water, and if we zoom in over here, we see the bubble that represents all the liquid fresh water. But that doesn't mean that it's all of the water that we have access to. This puts us into a problem of at least water scarcity. And as we can see on this study over here, there has been some changes in the trends of global freshwater availabilities, with some countries experiencing considerable depletion on groundwater. And in the case of Africa, it's also an interesting phenomenon. Even if they have a positive change in water availability, they are under economic scarcity, so they don't have the economic means to access these resources. One important point that was already made is that everything that we consume has an associated water footprint to it. For instance, I don't know how many of you had an orange juice for breakfast, but to produce those 3 to 4 oranges implies a cost, and utilization of around 200 liters of water. So that's a significant amount that we don't see. And this leads to virtual water trades from countries to countries. And as I mentioned previously, it is also expected that in the near future that a lot of our planet to face certain degrees of water stress. And this coincides to a lot of important agricultural regions. For instance, in California, it's already undergoing quite moderate to severe water stresses, which is expected to get even worse in the future. Not to mention some countries that were already arid, like Saudi Arabia. And talking about Saudi Arabia, this is a time lapse of the development of the largest agricultural sector that they have over there in the northern part of Saudi Arabia. As you can see, it's developed quite fast in only 10 years. I have to mention that every dot that you see on this video or on this image is a circular field with a diameter of 800 meters. For the people in the US or the ones that still use the imperial system, each field is about 50 hectares. And this is important because Saudi Arabia uses around 90% of its food for agriculture, but still needs to import 80% of the food. And this is due from a sense of water and food security. At least they are supplementing a little bit with that. And if you didn't know this before, Saudi Arabia doesn't have any major water bodies. So all of this agriculture is enabled by exploiting aquifers that don't get replenished fast enough. And this can be seen by the gray satellite that can help us track the volumes of water in the aquifer. And as you can see, it's showing a clear decreasing trend. So what we have, or the problem that we have in the water food energy nexus is an optimization problem. All of these sectors are interlinked together, and they have complex feedbacks between each other. So how can we achieve food and water security? I have to say that there is no silver bullet. There is no single solution that will enable us to solve all of these problems. And I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'm going to focus only on agriculture and on remote sensing technologies in specific. We have a wide set of technologies that enables us to observe the Earth's surface at different spatial and temporal resolutions. And that invariably will lead us to develop smart agricultural practices. So by quantifying what we have available at scale, we can come up with these better practices to manage our resources. Here is an image showing what spatial and temporal resolution mean for agriculture. If you see on the bottom of the image, we have a set of fields as seen by 4 different satellite sensors. In this case, MODIS has a spatial resolution of 500 meters and cannot see anything meaningful in the surface. And all the way to the present, where we have these shoebox-sized satellites called CubeSats that can work together as constellations for daily or near-daily images at 3-meter resolutions. And in the top part of the image, we see what we mean by a 3-meter spatial resolution. That's the size of the pixel when compared to the surface area. And for precision agriculture applications, we want this information to be provided at daily or sub-daily scales. So for instance, Landsat and Sentinel, even though they are very good resources, cannot provide the degree of frequency or spatial resolution needed for these applications. And again, focusing here on an olive orchard, we can see more what we mean by spatial resolution. As you can see in these little bubbles, there is not enough detail to see what's going on in the surface, properly at least. We have to go all the way down to 0.5 meter resolution from this satellite that's called SkySat to start seeing something meaningful about this olive orchard. And the problem with agriculture is that we not only have very huge fields to image, we may have a certain degree of surface heterogeneity or differences that we need to quantify. So at this point, you may be wondering why not use CubeSats directly if they're so great. It's because they don't have the same radiometric quality as other systems. So they need to have a correction applied before we use them for science applications. One of these approaches is through data fusion, basically using machine learning and combining other more traditional satellite datasets to correct and calibrate our CubeSats for agricultural applications or for quantitative application for that matter. And with these corrected images, we can derive a series of indices that are closely related to agriculture, such as NDVI, and the red edge NDVI, and so on. One important one is a leaf area index, which is very related with biomass and can track the vegetation development across the season. Here we see LAI developed with CubeSats and how it matches with ground measurements, specifically at the key development stages of maize. And these satellite observations enable us to track the vegetation or the field development throughout the season at very precise scales. And with these maps, we can see areas of the fields that are not developing properly, and potentially with this information, the farmer can correct. And we use these images for food security or relations, and that in the end gives us a yield output that is varying spatially. And we can do this at large scales. In contrast with UAVs, for instance, satellite imagery enables us to observe entire fields or entire countries even. And we can also use this for water applications. What we get is just a reflected light that we want to convert to heat fluxes. And we do this leveraging basically two approaches, the energy and the water balance, which we know that energy and water need to be conserved. And the key link between this is evaporation or crop water use. So we start with satellite remote sensing. We apply atmospheric correction, develop some vegetation indices, and we put this with meteorological data into an evaporation model to get these water fluxes. Here is a very nice study where we observed the highest spatial resolution crop water use product in Saudi Arabia for a commercial farm. And later we also apply this methodology in the United States to track crop water use for a maize field in Nebraska. And as you can see in this very nice chart at the top, it was able to track the temporal development of evaporation. So how do we move from a local scale to a countrywide scale? The answer is quite simple, actually. We can extend this methodology to map specific fields in the country. Like, for instance, here is a field delineation. Each shape over here is associated with a field. And with farmer data, we can create this sort of dashboards that enables the farmer and the government to track the water or the vegetation and yield throughout the seasons. Thank you very much, and I hope I didn't went that much over time.
No, it was Bruno. Thank you very much. And I want to thank you, Dr. Bruno Aragon, for his fantastic presentation. We are going to Earth to present our next speaker. Last but not least, Dr. Maria Jose Ibarrola, who is an associate researcher at the Institute of Geography at the National University of Mexico. Her main research topic is the sustainability of the food system. She is interested in analyzing the environmental impact of food from a demand perspective. And to do this, she focuses on the use of agricultural resources, land, water, and energy. She links what people eat with how it's produced. And Maria Jose studies the interconnections among the different drivers of the food system. Food production systems, agroclimatic parameters, and management practices with the drivers of the food demand, socioeconomic, demographic, and cultural situations which determine the diets of population dynamics. To do that, she calculates the use of agricultural resources per person and uses it as an indicator of sustainability. Furthermore, she analyzes trade-offs among agricultural resources, for instance, fertilizers, in order to approach it with an interdisciplinary perspective. She has revised the differences among regions to assess the future of these situations. Dr. Ibarrola, thank you for being with us, and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And thank you all the organizers for inviting me. So I will tell you a little bit about an ongoing project that I'm working with these co-authors to address whether Mexico has enough agricultural land to produce food for healthy diets. So the background or motivation for this project, well, first, the global challenge to reach healthy diets for everyone with the global limited resources. And well, since few years ago, there's a global awareness to promote sustainable diets. 2 years ago, the proposal for a global sustainable diet adaptable for every local region was published by the 8th Lancet Commission. So there's an ongoing global awareness on this. And Mexico is a good case study to see this global challenge within a country. And there's, and since a few years ago, there are two policies which also motivated us to ask these questions. First, there's a national policy to promote healthy diets, and actually now they want to adapt the parameter of a sustainable diet as the recommendation for the dietary guideline recommendation from the government to improve healthy diets, but now with the component of sustainable diet as well. And why? Well, there's the ones in Mexico know, but for the ones that don't know, there's a big public health problem in Mexico. Is the first country with children's obesity, for instance. The second country, sometimes the first, depends on the data and the year, of adults obesity as well. There's also a big problem of undernutrition as well. So there's nutrition is an important public health problem in Mexico. And the other issue is that lately, since 2 years ago, there's a public policy also to promote food sovereignty in the country. So to change the policies and support national farmers and not support food for exports or imports. Well, so based on these two policies and the problems, the environmental problems of food, and which it was widely introduced by my colleagues before in the other presentations. And also with this nutritional challenge, we want to explore whether Mexico has enough agricultural land to produce food for healthy diets for the population. So this is what I'm going to tell you some results for this exploration. To do this, first we divide the exercise in two parts. First, we want to estimate how much food is needed for three scenarios. First, the present situation to understand how the food system is. Then a second scenario based on this present design of the whole food system, we designed a scenario with no trade to identify how the system would look like if food trade stops. And another scenario of this food system, but so all people have healthy diets. Once we have understood how these three the B and C scenarios, hypothetical scenarios look like, then we link the use of land to each of these scenarios. So to give you illustrative perspective of what this is. So in the first scenario, we want to address what is the present food system that we will use it to design the other scenarios. We have the Mexican production. The Mexican production is used for the domestic supply. I will talk about this in a moment. But this domestic supply includes not only the Mexican production, the food production, but also the imports, the food imports. Okay, and then also there are some exits from the system, which are the food exports. And then, so we have the domestic supply, which includes the food, which is actually the diet of the population. We can use this to illustrate how the diet looks like, the average diet of the population. But this domestic supply also includes other uses of food and crops, and also food losses, and some also mix here, which I will talk later on. So the second scenario, which is how does this system looks like if food trade stops, then we have the Mexican production, so that's our starting point, the Mexican production. Then we have to see that goes to a step, and we have to allocate the different food in the domestic supply. Some of it will be used for food, but some others will be lost in the system, or could have other uses. And this food supply would look like the diets of the population. So then we can assess whether this is how nutritious the diet would look like based on this production. And then we want to see the other way around. So we ask how much food is needed to produce a healthy diet. So we have our starting point is a healthy diet. This would be the food supply, but we have to quantify also the parts of the food that would be lost within the system and which could be used for other uses maybe, and then identify how much food needs to be produced in order to have that diet. So it's not only food production and that's the diet, basically. And what I missed to say in the beginning is that in this project, we want to combine the perspective of the public health. So that's why a colleague from the Institute of Public Health is working with us, and also the perspective of the environmental impact and use of resources for food. So in this study, we are combining all this knowledge. We sit together, we discuss, and then we try to mix these two perspectives. So the other thing is to understand is that to design these scenarios, we divided the food supply mainly in two parts. One is the production, and then is the domestic supply. And in the production, we consider it includes the crops production, which is the primary crop production, all the crops that are produced, vegetables, cereals, tubers. And we also have the livestock and the processing production. So the animal products production and also the sugars, the vegetable oils, the alcoholic beverages. So to allocate these foods, we know that some of the crops production goes to the domestic supply. We have the production and we have the domestic supply. And the domestic supply is the mix of imports and exports and the national production. But also we need to identify that there's a feedback loop in which the livestock and the processing production needs crops. So basically crops for feeding the animals and also crops for producing, for instance, sugarcane for sugar, vegetable oil crops to produce vegetable oils and so on. And some of these inputs come from the national production, but others come from the imports and exports. So having that in mind, we designed these three scenarios, and to do that, if food, so this is a message. If food trade stops, livestock and processing production changes. It might be affected because of the reduction of crops from imports. So when we calculate then finally the scenarios, we see the production of the three scenarios as this. These are values in millions of tons, and this is the present scenario. This is what's presently produced in Mexico. The green are the crops production, so around 135 tons of crops are produced in Mexico. A smaller share are the livestock products, so meat and dairy, basically. And the gray are the processing production, mainly sugar, alcoholic beverages, mainly beer, and vegetable oils. But when we have the scenario assuming that food trade stops, the production reduces. Why? No? So the crop production is the same, but we assume that livestock and processing production reduces by 50% or a little bit more because of the reduction of feed, mainly feed imports, and also oil crops for producing vegetable oils. So we assume that. And then if we compare it with how much food needs to be produced for healthy diets, we have this picture. So much less crops needs to be produced, and also a little bit less livestock and almost no processing food. What does this has? That's the production. And then analyzing how would these scenarios look like for the food, for the diet of the population of these two scenarios, we can see it with this figure. What is this figure? It's divided by each of the food consumptions of the food categories, mainly for the average diet of the population. And in the blue bars, we see the present scenario, so how present diets look like, and the green are the scenario 2, which is the no trade scenario. And we compare these two scenarios with the healthy diet. So how nutritious or not nutritious are these diets of these two scenarios? And so one would be the value of a healthy diet. And we can see, and this is not new, because many studies in the nutritional and public health have shown it, the present diet, so the blue diet of the population, the present diet has much more than the recommendation of the consumption of sugars, grains, and red meat. Also eggs, and mainly meats, sugars, and grains. But if we look at how it looks like if the food trade stops, so with the green scenario, we still have a lot of that, but, and this is the red spot, the consumption of some livestock products like chicken, meat, and eggs reduces a lot. So this is a red point for the nutritional perspective, and also the vegetable oils. And in the other side, we have the food categories that are much less than the nutritional recommendation, which is mainly fruits and vegetables, which currently are consumed less than the recommendation. But if food trade stops, then we can see the green parts, for instance, that presently what is produced is enough for the Mexican recommendation for vegetables consumption to have a nutritional diet. That's not hard science, since we know that a lot of vegetables and fruit products produced in Mexico are exported. So this is what we wanted. That was actually one of the motivations for this study. And the other red point is that the consumption of pulses and nuts are much, much less than the recommendations, nutritional recommendation. And that's especially for pulses, which beans are very one of the staple food in Mexico. Since a few decades ago, its consumption is reduced a lot. And well, that's one of the issues for the nutritional problems in Mexico. And so based on this food supply, that's what analyzing the food supply of these three scenarios, we see that stopping food trade reduces feed, and this could reduce the animal products production, which in some cases could be good, both for nutritional and the environment, but it could have a trade-off with the nutritional aspects, since many share of the populations would require an increase of these food categories. Also, the vegetable oils will be reduced. And this issue with the pulses and nuts is also like a red spot. But now, looking at the land, because what we wanted to see is what's going on with the land. Now that we know how much food needs to be produced in each of these scenarios, then we can discuss how much land is needed to produce healthy diets and whether the land available in Mexico is enough. And we can to show you how we thought about it. So we divided the production of food in these three categories: the crops production, the livestock production, and the processing production. So basically sugars and vegetable oils. And to link the land, so crops production needs cropland to grow. Livestock production needs directly pasture for cows, basically, and also the barns for the rest of the animals. And processing production needs the factories. However, these two productions also need indirect cropland directly to the feed. The cropland needed to produce the feed for the livestock products, and also the cropland needed to produce the crops and food processing that is using the processing production. So the land for sugarcane, to produce the sugarcane for producing the sugars. So what we do, and this comes from the crops production because we don't include imports and exports. So if we calculate the cropland needed for the crops production for each of the scenarios with no food trade, then we have the cropland needed for the whole food processing. And to calculate it, we use data of crop yields and also some data from the literature. And what we come up is with this picture. Because of the time, shorten of time, I didn't go to the details. But this food, there's some in the food supply. There's a lot of food losses and food that are used for other uses, which also requires land, and that's included in these calculations. So what we see is this: the land use needed to produce the food with the no trade scenario is around 17 million hectares of cropland and this amount of pasture. And currently, this line, what it shows is the present agricultural land, including pastures and cropland. So actually it would use less than the available land in Mexico, considering that we assume that the livestock production reduces because of the reduction of feed imports, which is a lot. But remember that it's and as a result, some of the available livestock production for the diet will be less than the nutritional recommendations. However, if we look at how much food needs to be produced for a sustainable diet, this is the amount of land. So the amount of cropland is basically the same. I will show you a zoom in later on in the next slide. The cropland is basically the same, and that's why I show you this line here.
Sorry, Maria Jose, we need to wrap up.
Okay, yeah. So I will keep on with this picture just to see the magnitude, and I will jump to this one. If we zoom in the cropland for the domestic supply, then we see that the amount, this is the cropland for the food, would be the same than for the healthy diets, but the type of food that needs to be produced is different. And I just show you to zoom in, this is pulses, and we need to produce more pulses and less sugars and less grains. And I finish here. Sorry for taking more time.
Don't worry. Well, thank you for your presentation, Dr. Ibarrola. We would like to move to the Q&A section of our roundtable. I can see that all participants here at the Zoom chat have engaged in a very active conversation, very live dialogue. I would like to go back to a question by Luis Guillermo Garcia. I presume that he was asking this to Dr. Lydia Bamba Querido regarding he's interested in the parameters for analysis in order to feed the aquifer. I don't know if that
yes,
relates to your presentation.
This is, I can share the presentation. I don't know what, this was calculated in a previous project called Subsol, which is has finished and can be found online on Subsol organization website. But if you want more details, because this study was carried out by KWR, I can provide, he can contact me, I can put him directly in touch with the people that did the calculations. It was not me, it was a previous project. But I have given my contact details, he can contact me, I can put them in touch with the people that organized and did the calculations for the aquifer recharge.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And of course, I will encourage all our speakers to share their contact dates, email address.
Excuse me, do you want also the presentations we gave? Do you want us to send you the presentations? I mean, personally, I have no issues if you share.
Yes, of course, that would help.
Okay, I'll do it.
Of course. Thank you. Another well, we had a set of 5 fantastic speakers who presented a very broad perspective, multidisciplinary, very diverse, and from different standpoints in their either their methodologies or the aims and objectives of their respective research. I would like to take the opportunity and take advantage of the fact that, for instance, Carol and Bruno were exchanging some information regarding very particular aspects of Dr. Aragon's research and yields and crop prediction, specific information. What's the scope of your research regarding these projections and the technologies that you use, Bruno, and how is this relevant and applicable to other areas of the Nexus that we have been discussing throughout this session?
Well, at this point, the application is a little bit more local, I would say farm scale. But other than computation time, there is nothing preventing this approach to scale to a country level. So how does this link to the water and energy nexus? Well, because if you are able to predict the development of your crop aided with satellite images, you know which parts of your field you need, for instance, to irrigate or to apply more fertilizer or less fertilizer. Also, you may discover areas of your field that are under a particular set of stresses. For instance, water stress can be identified. Applying the right amount of resources there saves, of course, on resources, but it also enables you to produce a little bit more at the end of the season. So it's like killing a bird with two birds with one stone. You minimize your inputs and you maximize your outputs. The only caveat that I would see here is that these approaches also need to integrate another component, like the economic component. Maybe as a scientific research question, we want to optimize for water input, but there is one practice called the irrigation deficit that doesn't call for the optimum amount of water, but a little bit less, and still the difference in yields is not that much at the end, but the water consumption is different. So yeah, you need to also integrate more dimensions to this problem, as I said.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I'd like to move on to another question from our audience, from Pedro Camilo Alcántara to Dr. Ibarrola. Actually, your research is very interesting. Have you considered to get close to the FABLE consortium in Mexico? They're doing something very similar to what you are planning relating diets and land use. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I don't know FABLE, so I would be very interested in knowing who they are or what they're doing. So I will look for that, or if you can send me the info, that would be great. No more.
Right, so we're asking Pedro Camilo to please share further information with us regarding this initiative. I don't see any further questions from our audience, but I would like you to please make a few remarks, 30 seconds, beginning with Suzanne, please. I am particularly interested in the impact of your participatory model and its intersection with water and energy, and how this can be a very powerful tool to actually engage communities and individuals who are like-minded or who are interested in advancing this sustainability agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Rodrigo. I think the impact is really important when we consider participatory research and the nature of co-production of knowledge, which is at the nature of my project, because I think especially, by going into the field and working, in my case, with young people, but it could be any age group really, and drawing on the knowledge that is already existent, in these communities, I think it's something we're learning from what's already happening. I think this is a way forward to also designing more innovative solutions that actually are, being used by the people, instead of creating like top-down solutions that then are maybe not being used, and to kind of enhance the acceptance and understanding what the real problems and challenges are, and kind of find solutions in line with what is possible. So in my case, when we talk about water and energy, we often come up with the impacts like of energy scarcity or intermittent energy supply, also in terms of water and the the effects on that in terms of water saving. And I think there's a lot of knowledge. Actually, all the young people I talk with in terms of water, they all manage, water at home. There's a lot of knowledge about saving water and practices. So I think there's definitely something we can learn from. We can also apply across different countries. I think it's not something which is only locally specific, but could be also drawn on from learning from different areas.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Dr. Berner. Carol, would you like to make a few remarks?
Yes, thanks, Rodrigo. So I agree with what the other panelists have said about the need for solutions. So we have been working hard to identify the problems, and I think it's definitely essential, and we have to keep doing the measurements that we are doing. But what is also really important is to start focusing on exploring the solutions. And always the Nexus approach is helpful because, of course, you can never be completely holistic, but to consider the consequences. So, for example, on biodiversity, so Maria talked about land use, which affects biodiversity, the greenhouse gas emissions from agricultural practices. So not just water, for example, in my case, which is my background originally. So having those different perspectives in mind, and so ideally with modeling and with scenarios and with involving the stakeholders, of course, we can try to optimize and find what are the best options for a given area, which may not be the case for another one, depending on the priority. So yeah, lots of work to do, but it's been great also for us as panelists to meet each other. I think we get some connections started. Thank you.
Yes, of course, the intention behind this whole exercise is to promote further connections and potentially new collaborations between researchers in Mexico and the UK. So of course, we are also delighted to have you all here. Dr. Bam Querido, would you like to add something?
It was I'm very happy to be here because it's we don't have the opportunity to work with or to be in contact with the researchers from Mexico. I mean, we are in Europe, and being in European research, that's something that is not happening every day. So it was a very great opportunity, and I hope it will lead also to further collaborations.
Thank you. Maria Jose, would you like to say something?
I agree with what all the panelists said, and I just want to remark, I think Carol mentioned all, but that this holistic view of the nexus, of the trade-offs, and the local context increases the complexity of the analysis. But I think that's what it's obvious from the last 3 years. I think that that only if you connect these different trade-offs and synergies are a way to try to identify what's the better or best path to reach sustainable systems, different for each context. And it was great meeting you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ibarrola. Bruno, finally, thank you for your for the clarification and the updates on your new position. Best of luck on your future endeavors, and please, final remarks.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Yes, everyone said we need to take a more holistic approach to all of this. Traditionally, we have been quite siloed. We don't share as much as we should. For instance, the remote sensing community stays within the remote sensing community, even though there is a big overlap with the agronomists, for instance. Probably The only thing that I think hasn't been said is that we do need to communicate all of these plans with different stakeholders, especially with the government, because a lot of the times, all of the savings that we do in resources end up being not savings. Like if a farmer was consuming X amount of resources before, after optimizing, they will still consume the X amount of resources, but they will just produce more. So we definitely need to communicate that all of these savings are not to increase production indiscriminately. They're to actually reduce our footprints, our different footprints in the Nexus.
May I add something as a conclusion?
Yes, of course. Let's go ahead.
The interest on the Nexus has increased. I didn't present it here because it's a project that started about a month ago, and it's not Exeter is not involved, but KWR is very involved. We are at the moment we are going to produce the Nexus footprint as part of this project. I mean, after the water footprint and the carbon footprint, the research now is towards indicators for the Nexus footprint on the synergies. And I'm happy to announce that was funded by the European Union. It's a project called Nexogenesis, and had started in September. It will last for 4 years. It involves about 20-something organizations from Europe and also from South Africa. And we are going, actually, it's a South African organization that's leading the development of the Nexus footprint, but based on other footprints that have been already worked on. And that's something that is under investigation at the moment on a collective scale. I see us in 5-10 years, aside the water footprint and the carbon footprint, to have also the Nexus footprint in policy decisions, in everything, because it's coming.
Perfect. And on that note, on collaborations and future projects, I would like to thank you all once again for your presence, for accepting our invitation, and I would like also to acknowledge not only you but all the panelists, speakers that joined us for this 2-day event. This is our last roundtable for the day and for the event. And next we will be having the keynote speech of a person and an official at the Mexican Institute of Water Technology, who has been instrumental in putting this event together. And then, as you know, the Mexican Embassy in the UK and IMTA were the conveners of this event. Well, Agustín Breña, Dr. Agustín Breña, is one of the key people who brought all of us together, and he has obviously strong links with the research and scientific community specialized in water technology, and we are very grateful for his efforts and his collaboration and the environment that he provided for us as an embassy to create this bridge and this link between research communities in Mexico and the UK. Without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Agustín. This will be the last session of our program for the day and its totality. And on behalf of Ambassador Josefa González Blanco and the Mexican Embassy, it was a pleasure joining you for this program and this fantastic event, first of many, I hope. And I am Rodrigo Melendres from the Mexican Embassy. Once again, thank you. And Agustin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Good afternoon again in UK. I know you're probably it's time for dinner, so I will try to be as quick as possible. I know that I was honored to get this keynote lecture, the last one of this conference, and I will start. I mean, I know that this conference is about climate change. However, I decided to talk about a few things that, a few components, a few stressors that definitely have an influence on our water resources. So the title of this keynote is Beyond Climate Change: Mexico's Water Resources Under Multiple Stressors and the Role of Open Data. So I'm starting with this slide, which because we have the perception that climate change is our biggest threat. We know that climate change is out there and it is inevitable, but somehow we forget, or perhaps not us, we that are scientists, but authorities often forget that there are multiple stressors that we haven't quantified yet. And there are even other ones that we are not aware of it. So I'm starting with this slide, showing this famous quote from Donald Rumsfeld, who was the former Secretary of Defense of the United States and one of the architects of the Afghanistan and Iraq war almost 20 years ago. And as you can read this quote, he says that there are known knowns. So these are things that we know that we are aware of it, but we understand. There's also known unknowns. So things that we now know we don't know. And also there are unknown unknowns. So these are things that we don't know that we don't know. I mean, here that the question is climate change the biggest stressor or the biggest threat to our global freshwater resources? And this is, I'm showing here a cognitive framework that, although was applied to justify the US invasion to Iraq, it is a useful one when we try to see the whole picture of a problem. And if we translate this into a hydrology and water management context, then we can find different components in which our knowledge gap is substantial and why we should consider them when assessing future risks to our water resources. So here you can see the different box cases. For instance, we have the known, I'm putting here some examples of known unknowns, which are here in the upper left right box case. So, for instance, we have catchment and aquifer water balance, climate change, and other changes. More specifically, or the most famous is the land use and land cover changes. So we know that they exist, but we don't fully understand how they are impacting our water resources. We also have the unknown knowns. So these are the things that we understand, what are not aware of it, but also it can also mean things that we don't like to see. And here, as you can see in the known unknowns, the main components are physical processes, hydrological processes, climatological processes. And here in the case of unknown knowns, I'm putting a few examples which are mostly related to water management and governance. So such as, for instance, compliance with water rights, withdrawals, and use. So how much water are we allowing to people to extract, to withdraw, and how much water of this is actually being used. And of course, another example is water grabbing. So the appropriation of water resources, we know that they exist. Perhaps we know, or maybe some local authorities, they know who is grabbing water or land, but for some reasons they don't like to, they don't want the other people to know about it. And last but not least, we have here in the lower right, the unknown unknowns. So these are things we are neither aware or and we do not, nor we do understand. And here a very clear example is water theft, which we see in the next slide. However, all the decision making in water resources is based on things we think we know, but we don't. But do we really know? And actually, conventional studies in hydrology, at least here in Mexico, and I'm sure in most of countries in other places in the world, are not exempted from substantial errors and uncertainty. And this actually can result into misleading statistics and, of course, wrong decisions. So if we go to the next slide, the unknown, which is water theft. Water theft has gained some attention over the last couple of years, and I want to ask the following question to my predecessors, especially those working with models. Have you ever considered water theft in your models? How much do you think water theft can influence your results? And why am I asking this? Well, because it is estimated that between 30 to 50% of the global water supply is being stolen. And this number is likely to increase, mainly in croplands, and it happens everywhere. It happens in Mexico, as you can here see this paper published in 2013, which is a case study about water theft in Tijuana, which is a border town, probably the most famous, the largest border town between Mexico and the United States. And there's been other papers, other studies. I encourage you to have a read whenever you have time, which talk about this topic, water theft. And so when we see this number that between 30 and 50% of our global water supply is stolen, then the first things that comes to our mind is that perhaps in many countries, water theft could be a bigger problem than climate change. And the first step to answering this question goes by improving our quantitative estimates in our water resources. So now the outline. And in order to overcome this huge gap about our current knowledge about the known unknowns are the unknowns, I want to present a few case studies that have been carried out at IMTA using open data. So we will start looking on how open data can help us to infer the sensitivity of hydrological change, hydrological storage to extreme events, more specifically droughts. And then in the second part, you will see a couple of examples where open data and also open software can provide climate, agricultural, and hydrological services for better decision-making. So now we start with the first one. Here you are looking on how terrestrial water storage has behaved in the two transboundary basins that Mexico shares with the United States. The Colorado River Basin on the left. Here you can see a map where Mexico depends on a transboundary water treaty and here. So basically, only the delta part of the Colorado River Basin is in Mexican territory. The rest is in the United States. And the other example is the other transboundary basin is the Rio Bravo or the Bravo River Basin, which is fairly shared approximately half of the territory is in the United States, and the southern half is in Mexico. And here I'm showing the time series of these color plots according to this is the variations of the anomalies of terrestrial water storage since 2002, which is the top part of this figure, and 2020. So this is about almost 20 years of water storage variations within each river basin, the Colorado River Basin and the Rio Bravo Basin. Here the red colors represent a deficit, a deficit in storage, and blue colors represent an exceedance of storage. And interestingly, here both transboundary basins, when you have a look on how much runoff occurs in each basin, and if you compare that to the water allocations, then you see that water allocations exceed runoff in both basins. So if this is true, then of course that means that, or this implies that groundwater is already under severe pressure. So by having a more specific look on the Bravo River Basin, which faced a historical drought in 2011, as you can see here. So this is how the time series. This is how the time series of precipitation. You can see here in the top, and total water storage anomalies. This is again the color plot, and this is the time series of the monthly water storage anomalies. Look since 2002, and that's a year because in 2002 that's a year when the Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment mission, which is called also GRACE, which is a mission, a satellite mission that is constantly looking on gravity, on fluctuations on the gravity field provoked by changes in water mass on the terrestrial surface. So this is a proxy of hydrological storage, and you can see here that during the time series, you see that the negative anomalies happen during the dry season, and then the positive anomalies happen during the rainy season. So if you take a look here in 2011 and 2012, the positive bars basically disappear, and you can, if you look at the drought map from the U.S. Drought Monitor, you can see the drought conditions in Texas before the drought in 2000, here in October 2010, during or at the peak of the drought in 1 year later, and then 5 months later, in February 2012, you start seeing a recovery. And the interesting thing here is that after drought, there was some visible recovery, but the climate, so there was a climatological recovery in precipitation, but the hydrological recovery didn't happen at all. And actually, you see that after 2011, the color of this plot became red most of the time. So another way to look at it is if you have a look on the monthly climatology of GRACE, both for Mexico and on the left side, and for the United States on the right side. And this is, you can see the difference between both countries before the drought, which is the blue line. The blue line is the climatology from 2002 to 2010. And you can see that Mexico is dominated by the rainy summer season. So here it rains, groundwater recharge occurs, and also for the reservoir storage. And then you have a peak of storage in around September, which is also the rainiest month here in Mexico, in most parts of Mexico. And you go to the United States and you see a different pattern. Here the peak of hydrological storage is in March, which corresponds to the snowmelt season. However, so this was the period, the pre-drought period, 2002 to 2010, and from 2011 till 2020, this is the new climatology. So this is another way to see that 10 years after this mega drought, total water storage anomalies are still facing a substantial decline. And of course, the first question that comes to our mind is that if whether this catchment, this river basin, is resilient in hydrological speaking to drought, because it doesn't look like. And of course, another question comes to our mind, which is, should we call this a mega drought or rather the new normal? Another insights that we get from this analysis is that, of course, we have permanent negative anomalies. This is another plot where we seeing the monthly, again, the GRACE climatology for the whole river basin, and also between Mexico, which is the red line, and the US, which is the blue line. And also, if we separate the time series, pre-drought 2012 to 2010 and post-drought 2011 to 2020, we clearly see that during the drought, all the anomalies, even during the rainy season, become negative, and they become permanent negative anomalies. And also, for the case of Mexico, we see a lower amplitude in the monthly climatology. Before the amplitude was the spread was much larger. Here for the red line, and after that it became more shallow. And also, an interesting thing is that we are seeing potential temporal shift in the climatology. For instance, for the whole river basin, we see that before the drought, the peak storage occurred in March of every year, and after the drought, it went back 2 months later. In the peak storage now is occurring during January. Another example is if we look, or a similar quick assessment was done this year, where a drought occurred across most of Mexico, but the largest impacts were observed in the northwest region of Mexico, mostly the Sonora state and Sinaloa state. And here I am displaying the time series of reservoir storage of all the reservoirs in Sinaloa state. And again, I'm showing the GRACE anomalies that include not only surface storage, but also groundwater storage. And you can see a clear correlation, a clear connection between in situ observation, which is the dam storage, and remote sensing observations. Now, we want to have a look how open data, so because of open data, we can now have a rough idea about the variability of terrestrial hydrology, or at least the water storage component, but who's driving these recent trends? Is it our changing climate, or is it human activities? Mostly agriculture, both legal agriculture, but also illegal agriculture. So one of our research projects from this year consisted at mapping crop surface and classifying these areas according to the crop species, the type of crops. So here the question is, how much crops are we having in the upper Rio Grande, which is the most elevated part here in Chihuahua, the upper part of this transboundary basin. So we went to the Laguna Dominguez Aquifer, which is located, as you can see here in the map. And this is a very interesting region because there was a boom of pivot irrigation during the last decade. And we're talking about a semi-arid and arid area. And somehow, well, the water permits and rights were allowed to not only to allow irrigation, but also what type of crops are being cultivated. And if we go there, we see that the cotton, corn, and beans, and most recently groundnuts, which are intensive, like water-intensive crops, are being cultivated in this area. And for that, we use the Sentinel-2 product, which is an open data product from the Copernicus, European Space Agency. And we did a mapping for the crop surface from 2017 to 2020. And using Google Earth Engine and this satellite imaging, we derive using the NDVI and NDWI. We obtain different type of crops, and after that we did a classification. We developed a classification tool using supported vector machine, minimum distance, and decision tree models. And here you can see the result using each methodology, which is their respective area. So here you can see that the crop that dominates in this region is cotton. And here I'm showing some preliminary results validation by training the model and then by validating the model. Another aspect that where we are working is if we go to the irrigation districts in Mexico, which represent, I mean, by most, I mean 90% of Mexico's irrigated croplands are irrigated using gravity and furrow methods, which as you can see here, are the less efficient irrigation methods. And here we are using also different open data products. We are building digital infrastructure for agricultural water management. So the main objectives of this project is to informing the farmers when and how much water needs to be poured into their field. For that, we made a partnership with the Irrigation District 10, which is also located in the middle part of Sinaloa, and specifically the Module 4, this is the Module 4 in this figure, and we're talking about 15,000 hectares, and the whole polygon is divided into approximately 1,200 plots. And this is interesting not only because of the size of the project, which is we're talking about a multi-thousand hectare scale, but also because it was financed not only by the federal government but also by farmers. These some pictures of the irrigation district number 10. This is in Sinaloa. Sinaloa is what the U.S. Corn Belt is like. So most of the corn, 70% of the corn is produced in the irrigated croplands. There's also some beans and also some tomato, but I'd say 85% of the total surface goes for corn. And here we are developing a climate service using an open software, which in this case is the WRF model. And here we have a web page where you go to the website and you can see the forecast, not only for temperature and precipitation, but also for potential evapotranspiration. And you, for each irrigation district, and this is a 7-day forecast, and you can download the data. Of course, using all the outputs of the WRF model, we can make a forecast about the potential evapotranspiration. And this is supported not only by the software, but also by soil moisture sensors. We are also, we're talking about quasi-real-time data. This is not open, but this is also it is very useful information that can constrain our irrigation alerts. So here we are developing an agricultural services, again, using these commercial sensors. This is an example of the first measurements that we start making. And of course, this is the soil moisture variable is very important because we can determine water stress in corn plantations. And this is how it looks, the platform. So you can, it's called Sinmar. We have already a website. It's not very user-friendly, but we are working right now to improve the experience for all the farmers that will be receiving this type of information that we are generating. So here you can see the user can go to the website, and when it has access, then it can see its own field, its own plot. And also we are benefiting from data that is being gathered by the farmers themselves. So in this case, we are gathering information not only about the user, the farmer, but also when and how much surface is being cultivated, and also the amount of water that has been assigned, and how much water this farmer is getting. So at the end, we are gathering a lot of information about the different crops and the different cycles. So at the end, the farmers have for $1.5 per hectare per year, they can know when pouring water and how much. They also have a forecast about precipitation and potential evapotranspiration. They also will be informed about the water balance at the plot scale, how much water is coming and how much water is leaving the plot. And again, soil moisture monitoring, which is very important, and also another features such as knowing the water deficits and exceedance if you upscale that to the module. And next year we want to start doing some yield forecast with all the data from the satellite imagery. The water managers, they of course they also benefit by having by improving the information about the irrigation that is being happen, the irrigation practices, and most important, this is a ledger that is digitalized. They also can have a rough idea about how water use efficiency is going on. If this platform is improving, is it generating some water savings or not, and also some other features. And finally, the irrigation district authority, they can also gather some additional information for the planning for the next crop cycle. And also one interesting feature of this project, we are partnering with EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, which is a environmental organization, non-governmental organization in the United States, and we are exploring the feasibility of implementing this platform called OpenET, which is an operational system for measuring and distributing evapotranspiration data at the scale of individual fields across the Western US. So this platform was launched 1 month ago, probably. This is now right now it's available in California, and I think in Arizona and maybe Colorado. And this is a project that was carried out with the support of NASA and Google Earth Engine for all the geospatial features. And basically, OpenET uses publicly available data and open source models. You can see that are being run, and then they are uploaded in the platform. And here, so at the end, you can have an ensemble of these 6 evapotranspiration projects for every plot. This we're talking about for a spatial scale of 30 times 30 meters. And here you can see an example. evapotranspiration. And this is of course of great. This can provide great insights for water use, water footprint, and also eventually for virtual water trade. So if we manage to implement that in Mexico, we will be able to gather new information at on unprecedented scale. And this is very important because not only this is a product, this is not another evapotranspiration product. This is also, one important feature of this platform, of this project, is that the communication part. So this is actually being communicated to farmers and potential users, such as water managers. And then finally, another example of what can be done using open data for decision making. This is a study what one of my former students did in Costa Rica with my colleague Christian Birkel at the University of Costa Rica, and they basically he implemented a large-scale hydrological model in Costa Rica using remote sense data and also open source software. And this was calibrated. The model was calibrated only in 13 catchments, as you can see. Like in most places of Latin America, there is a serious information gap in like a hydrological information gap. So gauge catchments are not very common, but he calibrated and validated this model in 13 catchments with hydropower generation, and following that he did an extrapolations to the other 600 catchments that occupy the whole territory of Costa Rica. And this so that the tools that he used, not only we're not talking about like a hydrological open model, but also about GIS open model, all the libraries and the web development features were based in doing this type of open tools. And at the end, it was successfully applied across Costa Rica. Here you can see the metrics for the objective functions, Klein-Gupta and Nash-Sutcliffe efficiency, as well as the correlation, the Pearson correlation coefficient. And at the end, not only the results that were daily and monthly were not the results were not only acceptable, but also this model managed to capture different hydrological signatures, such as the water balance residual, baseball index, stream flow coefficient, and so on. And one interesting thing about this work is that the evapotranspiration from the mod 16 product based on MODIS improved the simulated water balance. So I'm closing this talk by highlighting the emergence of open data, what types of climate, agricultural, and hydrological services it can provide. And here, in the case of Mexico, for the first time, we have estimates about known unknowns, such as water storage depletion, crop water stress, and river discharge in Costa Rica. Of course, we want to continue with this work. For instance, of course, with the help of OpenET, we can improve our estimates about evapotranspiration, about water footprint, and of course, probably one of the most, I would say, one of the most interesting or ambitious projects that we would like to work on would be to assess water theft and how this is impacting our water resources and the water balance. So at the end, this type of new information, which is more reliable about this water stressors, can lead to a better decision making. And with that, I'm finishing. this presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'm open to collaborations for those interested. Thank you.
To provide not only the Mexican government but the Mexican people with accurate information regarding water resources and its potential use for human consumption and as a driver of our economy. I don't know if we have questions from our audience who is following us through social media platforms. There are no further questions in the chat box here in the Zoom room. So if we don't have any comments or remarks or questions from our audience through different channels, I just would like to acknowledge your presentation, Agustin, as well as the other speakers who joined us during this two-day event. Thank you very much to all the public that the audience, the members of the audience who joined us for the program, and we are hoping to establish new links and new collaborative efforts between researchers in Mexico and the UK in this very critical and very pressing issue regarding climate change and its interaction with water, agriculture, and economy. Thank you very much. Thank you all for watching, and hope to see you soon. Looking forward to all your input and feedback. Don't forget to go back to this transmission, which is recorded and will be available on our Facebook channels. And please feel free to leave your comments and remarks in the respective comment boxes there. Thank you so much, and thank you to Marco, Monica, and the rest of IMTA's technical team who supported us throughout this event as well. Thank you.
Thank you.